5 Soviet civilians on a platform with nooses around their necks are about to be executed by German soldiers near the city of Velizh in September 1941. The killing of civilians was a brutal tactic used by the Nazis in various occupied regions as part of their terror policy intended to suppress any resistance and intimidate the local population. Lieutenant Walter Tuning climbs the side of a burning plane to save pilot Ian's Byron Johnson in 1943. Johnson was returning from a mission when the brake on his Grumman F-6F Hellcat failed upon landing on the USS Enterprise. This caused fuel to leak and ignite the plane. Without hesitation, Tuning ran to the burning aircraft, climbed the fuselage, and pulled Johnson out of the cockpit, saving his life. In the photo, French women accused of collaborating with the Nazis have their heads shaved by members of the French resistance in Paris. These women, often accused of having personal or professional relationships with German soldiers, were subjected to this public humiliation as a form of punishment. Roger Godfrin was the sole survivor of a horrific massacre that took place on June 10, 1944, in Oradour-sur-Glane, France, when Nazi troops locked 643 citizens, including 500 women and children, inside a church and set it on fire. Roger, who was only 8 years old at the time, managed to escape before the church was torched, hiding in a ditch and fleeing to nearby fields. All the other inhabitants who were inside the church, as well as many others from the village, did not survive. Prisoners of war are forced to carry the bodies of their comrades who died during the Bataan Death March in April 1942 in the Philippines. The march forced about 76,000 captured soldiers, both American and Filipino, to walk approximately 100 miles under horrific conditions. Without food, water, or rest, over 10,000 prisoners died during the march. In the photo, a Japanese kamikaze pilot in a damaged single-engine bomber is captured moments before intentionally crashing into the American aircraft carrier USS Essex in the Philippine Islands. This attack was part of Japan's desperate strategy in the war's later years, where volunteer pilots, known as kamikazes, carried out suicide attacks against Allied ships. Nevertheless, this was not enough to alter the conflict's course, which was already turning in favor of the Allies. Slave laborers at Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany, after being liberated by American soldiers in April 1945. Buchenwald was one of the largest concentration camps in Germany, where conditions were extremely brutal. Prisoners were forced to work, suffered from starvation, endured torture, and were executed. It is estimated that more than 56,000 people died at Buchenwald. Rudolf Höss, the architect of the Auschwitz concentration camp shortly before his death. Höss was the commander of Auschwitz, where he implemented systematic extermination methods that killed at least 1.1 million people in gas chambers and crematoria. After the war, he was captured in 1946 and sentenced for crimes against humanity. In 1947, Höss was hanged at Auschwitz, the camp he helped design and manage. On Kiska Island in August 1943, after the Allied troops landed, a gravestone was discovered in a small cemetery among the bombed-out ruins. Surprisingly, this gravestone, crafted and placed by members of the Japanese army, marked the grave of an American pilot who had fallen on the island during the conflict. The inscription on the gravestone read, "Here lies a brave air hero who lost his youth and happiness for his homeland. July 25th, Nippon Army." In the photo, a Japanese aircraft is shot down while attempting to attack the USS Kitcon Bay near the Mariana Islands in June 1944. American ships were constantly attacked by Japanese planes. However, U.S. air superiority, with over 900 aircraft and well-trained pilots, led to a significant defeat for Japan, which lost about 600 planes, representing roughly 90% of its fleet mobilized for the battle. German General Anton Dostler, being tied to a stake moments before facing a firing squad in Italy on December 1, 1945. Dostler was the first high-ranking German officer to be punished in this manner after the war's end. He was tried and found guilty of ordering the execution of 15 American soldiers captured during a mission in Italy. In the photo, a German soldier is about to shoot a Ukrainian Jew during a mass execution in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. The city, like many others under Nazi occupation, was the site of brutal massacres during the Holocaust. The victims were forced to dig their own graves before being shot, with their bodies thrown into mass graves. This image was found in a German soldier's photo album with the inscription on the back, "The Last Jew in Vinnytsia." U.S. military authorities prepared to punish Dr. Klaus Karl Schilling, 74, in Germany on May 28, 1946. Schilling had been convicted in a war crimes trial for conducting malaria experiments on about 1,200 concentration camp prisoners. During the trial, Schilling showed no remorse, arguing that his experiments were necessary for scientific advancement, a justification rejected by the court. Mrs. Paul Titus, a 77-year-old air raid observer from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, carries a weapon while patrolling her area on December 20, 1941. She volunteered for this role the day after the Pearl Harbor attack and stated, "I can carry a weapon whenever you want." In the photo, a recently liberated Russian slave laborer points to a Nazi guard who used to brutally beat prisoners. Many American soldiers who participated in these liberation operations were unaware of the scale of the atrocities they would encounter. When they arrived at the concentration camps, they were shocked to see the condition of the prisoners and the evidence of the horrors committed. In the photo, we see Russian sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko, a symbol of the defense of Sevastopol in Crimea. Pavlichenko, one of the most renowned snipers in history, is remembered for her incredible skills on the battlefield. By the end of the war, she had killed 309 German soldiers, making her the most successful female sniper of all time. Dr. Nagai, a respected medical instructor and X-ray specialist at Nagasaki Hospital, became one of the many victims of atomic radiation following the nuclear bombing on August 9, 1945. Like many who survived the initial explosion, he suffered the devastating effects of radiation, which eventually led to his death. A few days after this photo was taken, Dr. Nagai passed away. A German firing squad executes Soviet civilians who are seated at the edge of a ditch in Kiev, Ukraine, in 1942. During the Nazi occupation, around 150,000 people, including Jews, Communists, Romani, and other civilians, were murdered in this region. In 1943, fearing the consequences of their crimes, the Nazis attempted to erase the evidence by exhuming and burning the victims' bodies to cover up the massacres. A U.S. Marine encounters a Japanese family hiding in a cave on the slopes of Saipan on June 21, 1944. The family, consisting of a mother, 4 children, and a dog, was hiding out of fear, influenced by Japanese propaganda that claimed American soldiers would be ruthless with civilians, prompting many to hide or even take their own lives. In the photo, 3 Japanese soldiers emerge from hiding to surrender after the Battle of Iwo Jima. Of the approximately 21,000 soldiers defending the island, only about 1,000 survived, with most fighting to the death. Surrender was rare, as many Japanese soldiers adhered to the code of honor and preferred to die rather than be captured. Japanese bomber planes nearly skimmed the sea as they attacked U.S. warships and carriers on September 25, 1942, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. This type of low-altitude attack was a common tactic among Japanese pilots to increase bombing accuracy and make it harder for American ships to defend against them. On the morning of Monday, August 6, 1945, a mushroom-shaped cloud rises to over 39,000 feet, 1 hour after the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. The bomb, named Little Boy, exploded about 2,000 feet above the ground, releasing energy equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. The temperature at the explosion point reached about 7,200 degrees Fahrenheit, as extreme as the surface of the sun. In the photo, the devastation around the ground zero is evident after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, Japan. The scene is one of total destruction of a city that was almost completely leveled within seconds by the explosion of the first atomic bomb used in combat. The bombing instantly killed approximately 70,000 people, with the total death toll rising to over 140,000 due to radiation effects, severe burns, and related illnesses. Incendiary bombs being dropped from American B-29 Superfortress aircraft over the piers and other buildings in Kobe, Japan, on June 4, 1945. During the attack, approximately 500 tons of bombs were dropped, setting fire to more than half of the city and killing about 8,000 people that day. Crew members of the USS Lexington abandoned the ship using lifeboats after the aircraft carrier was heavily damaged by Japanese torpedoes and bombs during the Battle of the Coral Sea. Shortly after the evacuation, the USS Lexington was scuttled by the Americans to prevent the ship from being captured. Mrs. Mary Couchman, a 24-year-old air raid warden, shields 3 small children, including her own son, during an air raid on October 18, 1940. The children were playing in the street when the sirens began to wail. Without hesitation, Mary ran to them, gathering them in her arms and shielding them with her body as bombs fell around. Praised for her bravery, she simply said, "Oh, it was nothing. Someone had to look after the children." On May 21, 1945, Colonel Byrd gave the order for the last remaining hut at Belsen concentration camp to be burned. Before the hut was set on fire, a rifle volley was fired in honor of the thousands who perished in the camp. Inside the hut, a German flag and a portrait of Adolf Hitler were placed, symbolizing the destruction of the Nazi regime and the final rejection of its ideology. General Dwight D. Eisenhower is seen delivering the order of the day, "Full victory, nothing else," to paratroopers in England on June 6, 1944. This happened moments before they boarded their planes for the first assault of the invasion of mainland Europe, known as D-Day. The operation marked the beginning of Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history, aimed at liberating Western Europe from Nazi control. An Italian woman kisses the hand of a soldier on October 10, 1943, shortly after American troops entered Naples following Italy's surrender. The city was one of the first to be liberated by the Allies. However, the withdrawal of German forces left a trail of devastation, with the Nazis destroying essential infrastructure and burning food warehouses. The arrival of the Allied troops brought not only liberation, but also humanitarian aid to a population that had suffered greatly. In this September 1937 photo, a German nurse places a gas mask on a young girl while her family looks on. At that time, with increasing fears of aerial and chemical attacks, the German government distributed gas masks to everyone, including children, to protect civilians from potential attacks. U.S. Coast Guardsmen on the deck of the cutter Spencer watch a depth charge explode as they provide convoy protection against Nazi submarines on April 17, 1943. German submarines, known as U-boats, threatened Allied convoys transporting troops and supplies across the Atlantic. The cutter Spencer defended these convoys, using depth charges to locate and destroy over 700 enemy submarines. In 1944, a fake city was constructed on the roof of the Boeing factory in Seattle to protect the facility from potential Japanese air raids. Hollywood experts were brought in to create the false setting. They erected trees, houses, and other structures up to 6 feet high to simulate a residential area viewed from above. The camouflage was created due to fears that Japan might launch air raids on the U.S. West Coast, especially after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Flames consumed the city of Tarumizu, Japan, following an incendiary bombing by the United States during a campaign to destroy Japanese infrastructure. The fire is estimated to have destroyed about 80% of the city, resulting in the death of 1,200 people and leaving hundreds homeless. The fire was so intense that it continued burning for days after the attack. In the photo, a German soldier returns home after the war to discover that his family is no longer there. Like many others, he found his home destroyed, his family missing or dead, and his property devastated after the conflict's end. The war caused massive displacements of people, the destruction of entire cities, and the loss of millions of lives. Hans-Georg Henke, a 16-year-old German soldier, cries as he is captured by the U.S. Ninth Army in Germany on April 3, 1945. Henke, like many other German teenagers, was recruited in the final moments of the war when Germany was on the brink of defeat. Lacking proper training, these young soldiers were sent to the front lines, often without fully understanding what they were facing. In the photo, parachutes open in the sky as thousands of paratroopers land in the Netherlands in September 1944. This moment is part of Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne operation in history, with about 15,000 soldiers landing by glider and another 20,000 parachuting in. The operation aimed to quickly cross the Dutch rivers and invade the heart of Nazi Germany, but faced strong German resistance and did not achieve the expected success. Broken shop windows of a Jewish-owned store in Berlin, following the anti-Semitic pogrom known as Kristallnacht, which took place on November 10, 1938. That night, synagogues were set on fire, Jewish homes and businesses were looted and destroyed, and thousands of Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Approximately 91 Jews were killed during this wave of violence. Jews being deported by train to concentration camps under the supervision of Nazi officials around 1941. The deportations were part of the final solution, the Nazis' systematic plan to exterminate the Jewish population of Europe. Many people were deceived into believing they were being relocated for work in new areas. They carried few belongings, unaware they were heading to places like Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and other extermination camps. Jews being deported by train to concentration camps under the supervision of Nazi officials around 1941. The deportations were part of the final solution, the Nazis' systematic plan to exterminate the Jewish population of Europe. Many people were deceived into believing they were being relocated for work in new areas. They carried few belongings, unaware they were heading to places like Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and other extermination camps. Jews being led down a street under the watch of German soldiers during the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland in 1943. The ghetto was destroyed after Jews rebelled against Nazi forces in an attempt to resist deportation to extermination camps. After a few weeks, the ghetto was set on fire and demolished, with survivors being captured and sent to concentration camps or executed on the spot. In the photo, Jewish survivors of the Nazi concentration camp Buchenwald are on the deck of the refugee ship Mataroa on July 15, 1945. These survivors, who had endured indescribable horrors, were now seeking a new beginning in a land that would later become the State of Israel. Fat Man was the atomic bomb dropped by the B-29 boxcar on Nagasaki 3 days after the Hiroshima attack. The bomb detonated about 1,650 feet above the city and had an estimated yield of 21 kilotons of TNT, instantly killing around 39,000 people and injuring another 25,000. Fat Man was more powerful than Little Boy, but due to Nagasaki's mountainous terrain, which limited the spread of the explosion, the devastation was somewhat less compared to Hiroshima. A Japanese prisoner of war in Guam in the Mariana Islands cries upon hearing Emperor Hirohito announce Japan's unconditional surrender. The surrender followed the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Soviet Union's declaration of war against Japan. For the Japanese POWs, the news was an acknowledgement of the end of a conflict in which many had sacrificed their lives and witnessed their homeland devastated. In the photo taken on December 7, 1941, the wives of officers watch a smoke cloud in the distance following several explosions at Pearl Harbor, unaware of what was happening. Army stewardess Mary Naden captured this moment and alerted about the situation. Seeing the planes with red circles, Mary exclaimed, "Those planes are Japanese." With this, the women realized that the war had begun. Sailors surrounded by aircraft debris at Ford Island Naval Air Station watch as the USS Shaw explodes. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on the United States Naval Base at Pearl Harbor. The attack lasted only 90 minutes, but it was devastating. 18 ships were sunk or damaged, about 300 aircraft were destroyed, and over 2,400 people lost their lives. White House reporters rushed to the phones after receiving the shocking news that Japanese submarines and planes had just bombed the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The information was relayed by Presidential Press Secretary Stephen T. Early, who swiftly informed the press about the surprise attack. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the declaration of war against Japan at the White House in Washington on December 8, 1941, one day after the devastating Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Immediately following the declaration, the U.S. economy was mobilized to support the war effort, with factories that had previously produced consumer goods being converted to manufacture weapons, military vehicles, aircraft, and other essential supplies for the conflict. In the photo, a store owned by a man of Japanese descent displays a sign that reads, "I am an American," in Oakland, California, in April 1942. The image was taken during a time of strong anti-Japanese sentiment in the U.S. following the attack on Pearl Harbor. Shortly thereafter, in February 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt authorized the forced removal of over 120,000 people of Japanese descent, most of whom were American citizens, to internment camps in remote locations across the country. Princess Elizabeth, then heir to the British throne, made her radio debut in London on October 22, 1940. In her 3-minute speech, the 14-year-old princess spoke directly to British boys and girls who had been evacuated abroad. Her younger sister, Princess Margaret Rose, was by her side to wish the listeners good night at the end of the broadcast. In the photo, a Frenchman is seen crying as German soldiers march through Paris on June 14, 1940. The city, once a symbol of freedom, was now under Nazi control and would remain so until August 1944. The man in the photo was not only mourning the fall of his city, but also what it meant for all of France. For many, the fall of Paris was an almost unbearable blow. Photo from one of the Nuremberg trials in 1946. At this tribunal, 24 Nazi German government and civilian leaders were prosecuted for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other serious offenses committed during the conflict. The Nuremberg trials were the first instance in which leaders of a regime were legally held accountable for their actions, rather than being punished summarily. This trial revealed the extent of the Holocaust's horrors and the crimes of the Nazi regime. The racetrack at Santa Anita Park in Arcadia, California, was converted into an internment camp for evacuated Japanese Americans who were housed in the barracks set up in the background. The living conditions at these camps were harsh, with overcrowding, lack of privacy, and inadequate sanitary facilities. Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin smiles as Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov signs the Non-Aggression Pact with German Reich Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop in Moscow. The pact ensured that Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union would not attack each other, allowing Hitler to invade Poland without fearing a Soviet response. Red Square in Moscow is illuminated by fireworks and spotlights as the Soviet people celebrate the victory over Nazi Germany on the night of May 9, 1945. Known as Victory Day, it became one of the most significant celebrations in the Soviet Union and later in Russia, with military parades and annual festivities to honor veterans and remember the sacrifices of the Soviet people. Adolf Hitler is cheered as he parades through the streets of Munich in 1933 during the celebration of the anniversary of the National Socialist movement. The streets are filled with large crowds cheering for Hitler, demonstrating the growing popular support he had garnered. The event strengthened Hitler's and the Nazi Party's control over German society, consolidating their power and increasing their number of followers. The British destroyer HMS Campbelltown is seen destroyed and grounded at the gates of the dry dock at Saint-Nazaire in German-occupied France on March 28, 1942. The Campbelltown was converted into an improvised weapon, loaded with explosives and rammed into the dock by the British. After the impact, the Germans did not immediately realize that the ship was packed with explosives. Hours later, the Campbelltown exploded, causing significant destruction and rendering the dock unusable. A crowd of onlookers in Seattle crowds a walkway to witness the mass evacuation of Japanese Americans from Bainbridge Island, Washington, on March 30, 1942. Approximately 225 men, women, and children of Japanese descent were removed from their homes and communities and transported by ferry, bus, and train to internment camps in California in an operation carried out by the U.S. Army. In the photo, a wave sweeps over the main deck of the oil tanker USS Neosho, engulfing the crew as the ship was refueling the aircraft carrier USS Yorktown in May 1942. Shortly after this photo was taken, the USS Neosho was lost in the Battle of the Coral Sea after being severely damaged by Japanese air attacks. King George VI of Britain makes a broadcast to the British nation on the first night of the war, September 3, 1939, in London. This speech was particularly significant as King George VI, who struggled with a speech impediment, managed to articulate his words clearly under extreme pressure, conveying the need to confront the threat posed by Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime. Filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl looks through the lens of a camera before filming the 1934 Nuremberg rally in Germany. Respected in the film world, Riefenstahl was selected by Adolf Hitler to document the Nazi Party Congress. She produced the film Triumph of the Will, which extolled the power and unity of the party and is considered one of the most influential and controversial propaganda films in history. This photo, showing Japanese ammunition being thrown into the sea, was taken during the U.S. occupation after the war. During this period, almost the entire Japanese military industry and existing weaponry were dismantled to ensure Japan could not return to a state of war. In addition to the destruction of weapons and ammunition, the Allies abolished the Japanese armed forces and prohibited weapon production in the country. The Japanese Constitution, which came into effect in 1947, renounced war as a sovereign right of the nation and forbade the country from maintaining military forces for warfare. In the photo, Russian men and women attempt to salvage their few belongings from burning houses in a suburb of Leningrad on October 21, 1941. The houses were set on fire by the Soviets as part of the scorched earth policy, which aimed to destroy anything that could aid the enemy, including food, shelter, and infrastructure. By burning their own properties, the Soviets prevented the Germans from using these resources, hindering their advance toward Leningrad. Civilians take cover behind streetlights in Dam Square, Amsterdam, as German Navy members aim a machine gun at the crowd. This tragic event occurred 2 days after the surrender of Nazi Germany, marking the end of the war in Europe. Dam Square was filled with people celebrating the liberation from Nazi occupation when German soldiers, still in the city, opened fire on the civilians. It is estimated that 22 people were killed and many others were injured. In the photo, people shelter and sleep on the platform and tracks at Aldwych Tube Station in London after air raid sirens alert them to German bombings on October 8, 1940. As air raids began, around 150,000 Londoners took refuge in the subway stations every night, seeking protection from the bombs falling on the city. Hundreds of people who lost their homes in the bombings found shelter in the caves of Hastings, a town in southeastern England. Once tourist attractions, the caves now served as a safe refuge. Many families set up homes there, bringing furniture and sleeping in their beds. Crowds of Parisians celebrating the entry of Allied troops into Paris scatter for cover as a sniper fires from a building on the Place de la Concorde. Although the Germans had surrendered and the city was under Allied control, small groups of German snipers and French collaborators remained hidden, spreading chaos and threatening the safety of both civilians and soldiers. On May 4, 1945, in a tent at the headquarters of the 21st Army Group in Lüneburg Heath, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, on the right, reads the Surrender Pact as senior German officers look on. The surrender signed that day was one of the final steps toward ending hostilities in Europe, marking the collapse of German defenses in the north and paving the way for Allied occupation of those regions. German soldiers remove a Soviet emblem during their campaign in Russia on July 18, 1941. Operation Barbarossa was the largest land invasion in history, with about 3 million German soldiers and over 3,500 tanks attempting to conquer the Soviet Union. However, they encountered intense resistance and were stopped before reaching Moscow. A Sudeten resident raises her arm in a Nazi salute shortly after the region was annexed by Germany in 1938. Previously, the region was part of Czechoslovakia, and the majority of the population of German origin welcomed the occupation. However, others like this woman felt fear and sadness. She likely felt compelled to support the new regime, even if she didn't agree with it. 4 Nazi soldiers sing in front of the Woolworth Company store in Berlin during the boycott against Jewish presence in Germany in March 1933. Although the founder, Frank Woolworth, was not Jewish, the Nazis claimed he was, justifying the boycott of his store. Nevertheless, Woolworth Company continued operating in Germany throughout the 1930s and was one of the first to rehire Jewish employees after World War II. October 1942, a Soviet soldier is seen alongside citizens who have lost their homes due to the destruction caused by the war. We can see the sadness on the face of the Red Army soldier as he listens to what happened to his country during the war. During the Battle of Stalingrad, one of the most brutal moments of World War II, entire cities were devastated, and millions of civilians were left homeless or lost their lives. A scene from the film Capo, A Story of the Holocaust, 1960, depicts a woman about to be executed in a Nazi concentration camp. This Italian film, directed by Gillo Pontecorvo, portrays the brutality of the concentration camps during World War II and follows the story of Edith, a young Jewish woman who is sent to an extermination camp and, in order to survive, assumes the role of capo, a prisoner appointed by the Nazis to oversee other prisoners. In 1942, a Russian spy is captured and executed in Finland, but surprisingly, he laughs while facing his fate. This unusual scene takes place in the Nordic region, where Finland and the Soviet Union were in direct conflict during the Continuation War, which began in 1941 following the German invasion of the Soviet Union.